Jesus talked a lot about money. The reality is that, God created money, God created our economies. Nearly everything, is impacted and operates through the economy in some way. We can't, avoid it. So we do want to be thoughtful, about how we use it.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Two Things You Shouldn't Talk About podcast. This week, we're joined by Jared Williams, who is a Christian financial advisor. Is that the best title for you, or what would you call yourself?
Sure. Yeah, there's several. I've used biblical wealth strategist. Christian financial advisors is okay too. There's not a standard.
Yeah. So for anyone that's wondering what that means, or what's the difference between a Christian or a Christian finance advisor, a personal finance strategist, what's the difference between that and your regular financial guru of any other establishment?
Sure. So typically people think of financial advisors as people who help with, insurance and investments. And certainly there are a number of, financial advisors who are also Christian. I guess what is distinctive about what I'm doing are two things, and we'll definitely get into this as we talk, I'm sure. But one is that we focus on biblical investments, and we'll define that later, I imagine. Second is, the reason I use the term wealth strategist from time to time is because we do things quite differently in terms of the investments that I like to use and the overall approach that I take. And so if I say financial advisor, people already kind of think they know what I do, and typically they're pretty wrong about what I'm doing. So wealth strategist is just like, oh, that's different. So what do you do? And then I can kind of explain how it is different. So that's why I often use that term.
Yeah,
just depends on how far in depth I want to go when I'm introducing myself to somebody.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm sure you can get down the rabbit hole pretty quickly with that whole subject. So when I saw your profile online and when I reached out, I thought it'd be really cool to talk to someone about the world of money and finance, because I mentioned that our podcast is the two things you shouldn't talk about, as in religion and politics. But if you were to add a third thing, I think money would probably be the third thing that people don't want to talk about at all. And it's all kind of interrelated, your political world and money, and it's all intermingled. So what kind of got you started in this world of finance? Is that what you studied, or what brought you into this area?
Yeah, definitely not what I studied. In fact, I think most people in the finance industry, that's not what they studied. That's not what their plan was. I know a few who actually studied financial planning or something in college, but that's unusual. There's not even a lot of schools with those types of programs. And the one that comes to mind, his father was an advisor and a financial planner, so that's why I think he got into it. Anyway, no, my background was actually in social work, and the plan was always to be a foreign missionary. So that was my career goal, during my college years. Excuse me. And even after I got married and graduated, so we got married right after I graduated, and my wife started a couple more years of school. So I worked in the social work industry for a while, doing foster care management specifically. The goal still being to go to seminary and ultimately go to the mission field. And it just didn't happen that way. We didn't want to go into a lot of debt to go to seminary. We kind of expected we would eventually get to a position of being able to cash float, and that didn't happen. And we got pregnant with my first. We got 3 children now, and knew we wanted to have a growing family, and just weren't going to be able to make things work on a single social work salary doing that. And so I've been praying about what other career, or what kind of transition to make. And so really a friend of mine called me up one day, and he had been sort of recruited to work with a financial company. They did term life insurance. That was pretty much all they sold, and asked me to look into it and see what I thought. Basically, he was saying, hey, you're a big nerd and you've read a bunch of financial books. Can you look into this and see what you think? But he said it more nicely than that. Yeah. And so I did some research on the company, and liked what I saw, and called him back. And I was like, I'm needing some part-time income as well. So yeah, why don't you sign up, and I'll actually sign up underneath you. And it was a kind of a multi-level marketing sort of organization. That was before they were, everywhere. And so that was the first time I had seen a company structured that way. So anyway, that was a very good learning experience. Not what I'm doing today for sure, but it was a good, step into the financial industry. And then after that, I spent a few years doing home and auto and primarily business insurance for a local agency where I live. And then one night we were at my church's Christmas party, and I met someone there he was my parents' age, and we were sort of having the what do you do conversation. Yeah. And he shared with me that he had started a company, and this was probably 20 years ago now. And really the Lord had given him a vision for this company, and that they were going to build mutual funds was essentially what they were doing, that screened out companies that were involved in unbiblical activities, whether that be things like abortion, pornography, addiction. Those are kind of the big three in my mind. And so they made these funds so that investors could, confidently invest with these funds, knowing that they're not owning companies that support or even profit from those types of activities. And that was he called it biblically responsible investing. And that was a new term to me. And at that time it was a completely original, vision for him as well. And that was pre-internet, when he started that. So now, we know that kind of God had given that vision to a number of people around the country. And so they had, several people had gone and started these firms all over the country. And now they've been able to find each other and organize. And there's an entire industry, in the biblically responsible investing space. So that was really what pushed me in. I had been invited and even asked to come and do more on the investment world from clients and people I'd worked with. And I was like, I don't want that responsibility to, manage someone's nest egg or something. That's too much. I don't feel competent to do that. And, that certainly changed, but it was that biblical aspect of it that really drove me, into the industry. So that's how I got started, with the more broad financial advising world.
Yeah. Do you think it's important that, well, I suppose we'll talk about, Christian attitudes, I guess, to investing and to finance and those sorts of things. But do you think if someone is to invest, that it is important to invest in companies that do support biblical values and biblical worldviews in general?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of ways to answer that question. First of all, we do take a very non-judgmental approach. So, I had been investing prior to meeting that guy at our church's Christmas party, and invested in typical secular mutual funds. And I didn't know what I didn't know. And that's where, most people that, meet me eventually, they'd never thought of it before. So it wasn't that they were obviously intentionally supporting anything, but they just didn't know. But once you do know, once you understand that, hey, these things are, very common all throughout the stock market, in particular, the mutual funds that most of us invest in, then I think there is some responsibility to do something about that. Because, ultimately, if you're a Christian, you likely believe that, your money is really God's money, that God owns everything. And so, we're stewarding what is his. And, should we knowingly, invest God's money into companies that, profit from abortion drugs or profit from the distribution of pornography or, rely upon addiction for their profits? And I don't believe so. Once we have alternatives to that. So that would be the first way I'd answer that question. But also to kind of give a caveat that most of the companies that we're investing with are not quote unquote Christian companies. I would even argue there's no such thing as a Christian company. There may be Christian leaders, Christian owners of a company, but people are who God saves and who become followers of Jesus, not companies. So certainly there are some companies that we invest with who do have Christian leadership, and there is more to their mission than profits. Others are just not doing anything unbiblical. They may not be again, quote unquote Christian companies, but they're not participating in stuff that we would say, okay, we don't want any part of that. So we're happy to help profit from their goods and services or whatever. But yeah.
Are there large companies that are involved in sort of unbiblical practices that people might not necessarily think that they are, or, just on the surface may not, immediately come to mind as, this company's doing things that we might not want to invest in?
Yeah, absolutely. And unfortunately, it's primarily the large companies, the biggest companies who are doing things like that. So, so to give a few examples, I typically try not to name names. I'm allowed to, I just don't, but people can connect the dots and kind of, understand those things. But, I mentioned, for example, profiting from the sale of abortion drugs. So, most of the big pharmaceutical companies have some sort of abortifacient drug, and obviously they sell other drugs as well. And, you could argue whether even that in and of itself is biblically responsible, depending on the drugs. But certainly the abortion drugs, I think it's a pretty clear, pretty clear cut there that I wouldn't want to profit from the sale of those, those drugs. Many large companies, give donations to organizations like Planned Parenthood and other pro-abortion organizations. You can invest in healthcare systems that do perform abortions for profit, and even though that's probably a small part of their revenue, it's there. And as the owner, you can't slice off this piece of it and say, I'm not going to profit from this part. You can't do that. A lot of companies now are a lot of media companies or cable companies or internet companies. They profit from the sale or distribution of pornography, even if they're not involved in the manufacturing of it. And now it's kind of getting blurry whether companies like Netflix and other
right, yes,
HBO and places who are producing their own stuff, they're on the border, there of even manufacturing it. And so when it's unclear like that, there's so many other good and easy to understand companies out there that we just avoid. We just avoid the bad. The other aspect of biblical investing to me is not only avoiding the bad, which we do want to do, but also supporting the good and trying to invest in something that does create impact and, as a blessing to the lives of others. And again, there's so many out there that we can do that. So for me, I've kind of taken that idea of biblically responsible investing and upgraded it a bit to include impact. That's almost a necessity in my mind when we're looking at becoming a biblical investor. Again, because we can, why wouldn't we?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you a little bit, maybe about how investments, can be used to bless others and to support these companies that are doing good. But maybe first of all, immediately people might, what comes to mind is this whole idea of money is the root of all evil, and seeking, I guess, wealth or increasing your wealth, multiplying that is a negative thing to want to do. And what would you say about people who immediately assume that this whole world of finance and money is immediately kind of somehow taking your focus off God, or somehow becomes an idol when you want to increase your wealth?
Yeah. I can't say that it's not a challenge. It is. Jesus talked a lot about money. The reality is that, God created money. God created our economies. We nearly everything, is impacted and operates through the economy in some way. So, and that's been, all of time, all of the world, it just is part of God's creation. So we can't, avoid it. So we do want to be thoughtful, about how we use it. And certainly Scripture gives a lot of caution about money. If you look into Scripture, and I've spent a lot of time, studying this as I've been building the company, and thinking through things myself, really seeking what all does Scripture have to say on it. And God used very poor people, He used extremely wealthy people, and really everyone in between. And so it's pretty clear, that the money itself is amoral. So we certainly can love money. Money can become an idol. It can become a challenge for us. But it's also a necessity. We do need it to get by. We are told to save, to be responsible, to leave a legacy for your children's children, and of course that can be spiritual legacy. There's more than money, but I think in Proverbs it does imply, it's talking about houses and stuff. It's implying property and money and finances and things there. So I did a podcast episode about this several months ago, and I spent quite a bit of time really trying to come to grips with my answer. What should be our goal? Should Christians pursue wealth? And I know that there's a lot of financial advisors out there who want to help their clients achieve what they call their maximum wealth potential. As much as you can get. And it's not about having a lot. It's about whether it's going to be a lot or a little, because not everyone can accumulate a lot. But whatever you could come up with, it's getting the most that you can, your maximum wealth potential. And I think that makes sense from a financial standpoint. But I questioned, does that make sense from a biblical standpoint? And for most people, it doesn't. I think instead we're called to be the best stewards we can be. And that may mean that there's a time when we have enough, financial assets, and we should use our time, use our money, use our gifts and talents, and in the service of others, and not be so focused on, having more and more. So stewardship is kind of the qualitative goal, I guess, that I'm looking for. From a quantitative standpoint, I was like, well, we still need to have some kind of financial goal. And so I think financial freedom is what I am trying to help families achieve. And, different families are going to land different places on that. But once we become financially free, and that's not a quick thing, but once you become financially free, you now have the freedom to choose how to use your time. Do you want to continue making money because you're really good at making money, whether it's in your business or job or in investments, and you give a lot away and you send a lot of missionaries? Or do you want to, stop spending your time on making money and go yourself, or use your gifts, at your local church or in your local community, or spending time with your kids and grandkids, or whatever that can look like? So for me, it's helping people wisely get to the position where they don't really have to rely on money anymore. They don't have to work for their time, or put their time toward work. They can still be productive stewards, however God's uniquely called them. I hope that makes
Yeah.
sense. That was a lot.
Yeah, no, that was good. So, in terms of this idea, you mentioned kind of financial freedom as this phrase. So, does that mean, just to expand on that, does that mean getting to the point where, I guess, you're not slaving for wages and you have an income that's not just taking up all of your time? Am I getting that right, or what does that phrase mean to you?
Yeah, there's kind of 6 building blocks to it. We won't go through all 6. That would get boring and be a whole episode. But basically, when you get to the point where your passive income, so income from investments or income from businesses or whatever, but your passive income, meets your lifestyle needs, where you don't have to work for your income. You could stop working and still have income coming in from investments. And so, when I'm working with people, we are more focused on cash flowing investments and not just building up this number to, be the biggest we can.
I mean, that sounds tough. Is that easy? Can anyone get to this stage of not having to work, slave away for money?
Yeah, not quickly. I mean, it still takes most people their working years, or they can get to a point where they have some of their income is offset by cash flow, and they can work part-time now. But they have some freedom of time. So it really looks very different for different people. I have families who struggle to save, and I have families who are saving 6 figures a year. Obviously, some of them are going to get there a lot faster than others. So it depends. It's just a little bit different focus than building up your retirement nest egg to as big as you possibly can and waiting until you're 65 or 70 and then retiring. Maybe, we can get there faster than that. Probably not by 30. Most people can't do it at 30 or 35, but by, 50 or whatever, it's possible for some people. And then they can, again, use all of their God-given talents in the service of others and just not have to work, or at least not have to work as much.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to bring up Dave Ramsey because I think he's divisive almost in the financial world. I'm not sure what your opinion is, but I've listened to quite a lot of his advice, and what strikes me about his is this idea of debt being a negative. What's your view on debt and really how it can cripple some people and cripple their income?
Yeah. I think debt is like money. It's amoral. I'm not anti-debt. I mean, certainly we use mortgages. A mortgage is a good thing. It allows us to own a home much earlier than we likely could if we tried to save up for it. And, so I'm not anti-debt. Again, I think that we need to be good stewards and treat it, wisely. So I do try to help people get out of, what I call unproductive debt. So like credit card debt and things that's, debt that's very high, debt that is kind of crippling, that sucks up your cash flow and that sort of thing.
The car loans and these sorts of things.
Yeah, car loans are kind of in the middle. Those are sort of a case by case basis. I'm certainly not anti car loans, but for some people it makes sense to pay them off too. So debt is just another thing that we're figuring out. When I'm looking at the big picture, we're figuring out, does it make sense to attack debt or not yet? And which ones should we attack? I often help people use debt. Use low interest secured debt to be able to have some cash flowing investments earlier than they would be able to. Things like real estate, being able to make use of debt to start investing in something that would take a lot longer to save up to, but it's still being profitable, it's still being secured, and it's still being very low risk, and how to do that. So I'm not in we should be, debt free does not equal financially free to me.
Okay. Does debt tend to be a huge issue for people who seek your advice, though? Is that something that you see quite often as something that a lot of people really struggle with?
Yeah, when you start marketing and putting out there that you do biblical investing, that interests Christians at every part of the financial spectrum. So I have clients who are completely debt free, and they came to me debt free, and I have clients come who have a lot of debt, and again, kind of everything in between. So it's something we help people with if they need it, and if they don't need it, obviously we don't work on that. So I would like for all of my clients to become free from unproductive debt. That is a part of the goal, and a fairly early on part of the goal.
Yeah, and in terms of the people that come to you, like, what do you see as the biggest issues from? I guess you're talking from an American societal perspective, but in terms of money, what are the biggest negative impacts on people's lives? Is it this attitude towards spending and debt, or is it maybe people just don't really know what to do in terms of investment, or what are the biggest issues that you see from people's view of money?
Yeah, that's very across the board as well. most people come to me initially for the idea of biblical investing. They realize, oh, I probably am invested in companies that I would not want to support now that I've thought about it, now that I've been introduced to the idea. So that's typically our starting point is, okay, can we move some of these over into funds that are, that have been screened to at least not have the bad, the unbiblical activities in it. And then we kind of circle back around and say, okay, so what are the actual, financial priorities? Because that's just moving money from, this hand to that hand. That's a pretty easy process, honestly.
Right.
So people come to me with their problems are, in their mind, what they'll come to me and tell me their problems are, debt, or there's, disorganization of their finances and, budgeting and things like that. That's people who are still in the typically what I call the preparing to build wealth stage, or they're beginning to build wealth, like they're pretty early on, or they're coming and they're making good money and they've paid off their debt. So now it's like, now what do I do? I've got all this money, I've got it saved up. I don't know where to invest it, or I don't really want to be in the stock market. And so it's a totally different problem, that we're looking at some creative investment solutions, and oftentimes they have a lot of options, and it's like, I don't know which one makes the most sense. I don't know where to begin. Not typically a lot of issues with attitudes about money. It's just more dealing with whatever their problems are, whatever their concerns are at that point.
Do you see those issues across society, even from people who aren't, coming to you for advice? What do you see as the big issues facing society today in terms of money?
Oh, goodness. Big issues facing society.
I guess in people's views of money, I'm trying to see, in terms of having a healthier view, the average person on the street, what do you think what is sort of stopping people from being responsible really with their money? What are the big issues facing people?
Yeah, I think getting into debt really early on, credit card companies and stuff are fairly predatory, and, get college students or people right out of high school, and, that they get into debt really quickly. Student loans are not necessarily a bad thing, but I think they're overused. They're certainly not, I don't think they should go away. We should be mindful of whether it makes sense to be in college, where you are in life or whatever, and whether it makes sense to go into debt for that. So debt can be a problem really early on, and then that affects people's ability to save, and then of course their ability to invest. And I think just consumerism in general is a problem in most first world societies, that we are told and taught, to buy a lot, to overextend. And so that keeps a lot of people from being able to reach their financial goals. I would say one of the biggest problems that people don't come to me for, that's not a problem they acknowledge, but is not having enough protection in place. Men who, the single provider, have a wife, have a few children, and don't have life insurance or something for that, as an example. I see that sort of thing all the time, and it's not considered a problem. It's not necessarily a societal problem, but if that person has a car accident or some kind of unexpected health issue and passes away, that's going to be a really big problem, that the wife is likely going to have to solve. And it can end up becoming, a burden on their community or their family or whatever. So that's an issue that no one ever comes to me for, but it's a real issue.
Yeah. That would be sort of a piece of advice that you end up giving to people, and very rarely they end up asking for it themselves.
Yeah, hardly anybody comes to me, because they're like, I don't have life insurance, I need to get it. It's happened. But typically we're looking through things and saying, okay, just asking questions and helping them see, that's a big, big problem that we could easily and very inexpensively solve.
Right. Yeah. I guess it's not something that immediately comes to people's minds straight away, because I think a lot of people maybe think either they don't need that or their savings can maybe cover it, or, but really what people can end up in these huge, like you said, these like something tragic happens, and then, really very rarely, I guess, will people's savings cover that sort of a massive blow. When you think of people and savings, what's the right balance between, I guess, investing and keeping a certain amount for savings? What would you advise people? What's a sensible amount to kind of hold back from investing in other areas?
Yeah, that's a great question. That is another problem. We get in a hurry to invest, and typically don't have enough cash. And, just COVID has exposed that as an issue. Families and companies that had more cash have certainly weathered things better. Even if you had a lot of investments, it was hard to get access to them. And some of the governments, created ability to access some of that money. But even then, it was not all accessible, and it was difficult for some. So I think we've now seen how important cash can be. Typically, I do take this sort of approach of protection, savings, growth. That's the order that I like to help people go through. So even if they're coming to me for investments, I'll help them if it's a small, simple thing. But if it's a big scale thing, it's typically, we'll take a couple of steps back and look at the foundation first. What are we building this foundation upon? Because it doesn't matter how well you invest. If some of these catastrophes happen, it's gonna be gone anyway. So let's protect it first, and then savings is kind of the middle piece of that. So I like to help clients practice saving first and really building up more than an emergency fund, but what I call an emergency opportunity fund. And typically the investments that I'm helping people with, of course, we have those, what I call biblically screened mutual funds. We have that, but most of the investments that I like are non-Wall Street investments. And so they typically have, $20,000, $50,000 minimums, but they're often much better investments for a variety of reasons. They typically have more reward, less risk, and but you got to save up, to get there. And so we're helping people save, way beyond their, 3 to 6 month emergency fund, so that then they can, take advantage of these better investments. And we can help them, save in ways that are still productive. They're not, completely losing out on interest, but they're doing it in a way that's still liquid, still, no risk, and just more productive than saving in the bank.
So this difference between protection and savings. So just to clarify, that is protection. Then is that kind of like the first step of having enough to just cover you for everyday emergencies, or is that more the insurance side of things that you're talking about? What comes under that protection category?
Yeah, good question. I appreciate you asking that, making it clear. So yes, I'm typically meaning different kinds of insurance. So the life insurance, like we mentioned, home and auto insurance, liability insurance that comes along with that, health insurance, disability insurance is one that's often overlooked. So getting that foundation laid first, honestly, is even more important to me than saving the emergency fund. I mean, again, if you have a car accident, you need $5,000 or something to fix the car. That's going to hurt. If you don't have it in the bank, you're going to have to figure out how to get that. That's nothing compared to how it's going to hurt to pass away, or to have a home loss, or have a major liability, or a health issue, or something that's hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. So I want to help protect against those catastrophic events, even though they're unlikely. They're catastrophic if they happen. Let's get those things taken care of, and then we can get some money in the bank to replace the washer and dryer, when it tears up or whatever. So I'm always looking at what's the worst thing that can happen. Let's effectively deal with that first, and then then we'll address the smaller things, the headaches that you may have to go borrow some money for or whatever, but it's not going to affect your financial outcomes long term. So that's what I mean by protection.
Yeah, I'm sure you've gone into this kind of stuff on your podcast and your website, but if you were to make a small checklist of the first few things that people who maybe they aren't your clients, or maybe they're listening to my show from the UK or things like that, what are maybe a couple of things straight away you would advise people to do that just really help them against these like you said, maybe catastrophic things, or just some quick things that people should really maybe put some focus on to help them financially?
Yeah, I mean, it is having those insurances that I named, having term life insurance, and I like whole life insurance as well. I don't know that is available in the UK.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure myself actually about that. Because I mean, this is a good probably time for me to say I haven't necessarily considered that myself. I guess I'm not a homeowner myself yet, so maybe I haven't just considered those things. But talk to me as if I'm someone that doesn't know about these things either. So what are the benefits of the different types?
Well, it's probably not as helpful, honestly, to go into the different types. So if we're talking about someone who's starting out, they don't have any protection. If they're coming to me, regardless of country, I would help them get term life insurance first, because it's the cheapest. It's kind of renting your life insurance. It's not permanent. So it's the one you should start with for sure. I mean, you're looking at dollars a month, to get that going. And it's not to protect your home. It's to replace your income. So if your wife, if you're married, especially, and have kids, if your spouse would be dependent upon your income, if it would be a big loss, they would have to move back home to their parents, something like that. If they could not, provide for themselves sufficiently without your income, then you would want to have that protected through life insurance. Disability insurance is basically the same thing, covering a different risk. So you have to die to get life insurance paid out. disabilities, if you have, sick or injured or something like that, but you don't die, then it helps to replace income as well. And then medical insurance, again, that's a different ball game in the UK, but wherever you are, making sure that you have that in place, that there's not going to be this potential of a, hundreds of thousands of dollar medical bill from a car accident or from a, diagnosis or an accident or something. And then home and auto insurance, and even more importantly is liability insurance. So that's a really good one to bring up. Even if you don't own a home, renter's insurance typically includes personal liability coverage. Again, that's the case in the U.S. I don't know about other countries. I would expect that it does. And again, those are the types of things that are unlikely to happen, but they're super cheap. And you can get $1 million of liability protection if you cause bodily or property injury to someone else. That's what that's protecting. So, if my kid hits a baseball and it hits someone else in the head, and that sort of thing has happened, or someone, a kid comes to my house, or anyone comes to my house, my grandparents come to my house or something and have an accident and get hurt. It could be considered my fault, even if it really isn't my fault. It happened at my residence. And so that's insurance that can just cover those kinds of, potentially catastrophic losses. So typically you can get the basis covered for relatively low dollar amounts each month. And it's well worth it to have that protection in place, especially before you begin investing, because again, it doesn't matter how good of an investor you are. If you get a, $500,000 bill for any of those reasons, it's going to hurt.
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of then, if we move on from that then to this idea of investment biblically, I mean, you mentioned a little bit of that before, but what way do you see, or what are some of the ways that people can use their investments to benefit others? Because you mentioned some of these companies that are doing good. What ways can people use their money to help and to benefit society in these ways?
Yeah. For the most part, that is done off of Wall Street. So it is possible on Wall Street, but you have to really know what you're doing and being pretty intentional. And that's typically going to come in, initial public offerings when companies are first going public, and it's hard to invest in those. So typically the investments where you're, blessing others is again off of Wall Street. These are direct investments. Versus buying, secondary shares that are just traded amongst all sorts of institutions, which is what's typically happening with mutual funds. So you're able to directly profit from companies on the stock market, but it's hard to actually give them your money. You're just buying it from somebody else, kind of like buying a used car, a used book, or something like that. So some examples are, we've had clients who invested in a variety of different ways, but invested into assets that are, renovating homes, taking homes that, people couldn't live in, or someone, needed to sell, they needed the money, they needed to sell or downsize or whatever, taking these homes and renovating them and making them much more, beautiful, affordable, safe places for families to live. And that may be a single family, it may be, an entire apartment community that needed renovation, needed, some major repairs and improvements to make them safe and better places to live. We've had clients who invested with companies that they actually profit by helping families who've had some sort of financial hardship be able to keep their home, versus being foreclosed on and losing their home. There's ways that you can invest and help them keep that home and profit in the process, which I think is a fantastic, blessing to them.
Absolutely.
We've helped clients invest in, in lending money to small businesses, so that they're able to, grow and expand and just provide more of their, beneficial products and services. And again, these are, direct type of investments, so that, they're actually getting the money, they're actually going out and being able to expand and doing more of what they're doing. And so those are a few examples. Sometimes it goes even farther than that. We have one investment provider we work with who, they're again, Christian leadership, not a Christian company, but a Christian leadership, owners of these companies. And they give away 50% of their profits to support adoption.
Wow.
And so that's just something that, they're already blessing the, customers that they're serving. But then on top of that, they just have this God-given mission to support adoption. And so they do that because they are very profitable. And so they have more than they need. And that's a way that they give it away. But, when you invest with them directly, you're helping, they wouldn't be able to have that profit without the investment dollars. They're dependent upon the investors to be able to do that. So you're just blessing a lot of people along the way with that type of investment.
Yeah. And the solutions you're recommending to people, there things that the average person can get involved in? Is there ways that people can, like you said, renovation of houses and these things? Are there organizations and funds and things like that where the average person can get involved in that without having thousands and thousands of dollars, saved away that they can, spend every month on these kinds of investments?
Yeah, again, I'm not super clear how accessible it is outside of the US.
Yeah.
I suspect there are similar things in other countries, or some of them may even, I know some of these are available to, international investors. So, the direct owning of real estate, I know international investors could own real estate here. And you're typically looking at like a $25,000 investment. So I know that's not a starting out amount.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a small amount for some people. That's a huge amount for some people. So it just depends on where you are. Some of those that I named, have the one where you help people stay in their homes has $100 minimum.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know how available it is outside the U.S. I could probably look pretty quickly and see, but I'm just not sure.
Yeah. No, a lot of our listeners
very affordable.
A lot of our listeners are from the US, so this will be very helpful for people tuning in that are from there. And I think that's a great thing, like you mentioned, to have such a small amount that people can start to contribute towards these sorts of projects. I think it's amazing, like you said.
Yeah. I've been intentional about finding opportunities that do have small minimums, and then of course there's some that require $100,000 to get started.
Right.
So it's very across the board. The smaller minimums are a little more limited. You typically got to go to Wall Street for that, but I have options for that as well. So I've worked hard at making sure I can help people regardless of where they are financially. Right. And sometimes that means I'm partnering with somebody else. Like I'm not directly doing it. I'm saying, okay, I'm going to assess your situation and I'm going to connect you with this person who's an expert at what you need, because I'm not, and get you in touch with them. And when they get done and you guys have made some progress, come back and see me, and maybe I can help, or I'll connect you to the next person.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I'm certainly not the expert at everything. So I've worked hard at building up a team. So we do have experts at most everything.
And in terms of charity, what way do you see that fitting into the average person's budget? What would you recommend in terms of charitable giving, as well as just, I guess it's a form of investment, but really not seeking to see a return? What do you recommend that people do for that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, there's debate over whether the tithe is an actual 10% or things like that. I tend to think that it is. Regardless, that's a good starting point for people. And I think, the Bible does call us to kind of stretch beyond that and to give beyond even our tithe. So the Bible does not give, more specific numbers to that. So neither could I. I think, again, you just have to have this mindset of stewardship. If you do want to be prepared for the future, if it's going to take everything that you have beyond the tithe to prepare for the future and be ready for the time when inevitably you no longer can or want to work for your income, then you probably should be more sparing on the giving, unless God calls you to do something. And then certainly you should be obedient to what the Lord says. If you have more than enough, then, give half, save half. It really is. It's just a matter of prayer at that point. So, and I have those conversations with people. We help kind of figure that out, but it's always a case-by-case basis. And I'm almost always saying, you should go pray about it. Here's some ways to think about it. Go pray about it. Let me know what you like to do. I'm happy either way. I think that we have our, God kind of gave us our minimum. We can kind of figure out minimums from a saving and investment standpoint on a case-by-case basis. Anything beyond that is up to you to figure out what to do with.
I guess it was more, you hear people that think the tithe is maybe more of an optional thing, and I was more trying to see, is that something you would recommend people participate in with their budgets, and in terms of both blessing others and blessing themselves? You definitely recommend having this almost built into your budget.
Yes, and I want to be transparent. Like that's been a struggle for me at times too. When you're starting building a business. I had somebody ask me one time years ago, he's like, so what do you do? And I told him I was a financial advisor, and he was like, oh, that means you're loaded then. And I was like, no, I was like, it means I may be one day, like the potential is there, but you do not start out. Like that. In fact, most people who are starting businesses, it's very difficult for the first few years. And so, to be totally honest, like there was times when we tithed out of, in hardship, and times when we didn't, when I was fearful and I was like, I can't afford to give this money. I've got to pay this bill or whatever. And so yes, I think we should tithe kind of regardless of circumstances. And I think scripture tells us that, but I don't want listeners to hear and get the wrong impression that I've always done that well, because that's not been the case. So I'm saying what the Bible says, not what I have practiced.
Mm. And I think, I think there's a lot of blessings that come from doing that as like you said, haven't always fully, done that myself either. But I think from since I started doing that, I think, you almost putting that aside at the start rather than thinking of it as an afterthought, that
Mm-hmm.
almost prioritizing it for me, I found that really useful. But I definitely think, that there's definitely clear benefits almost spiritually and mentally yourself, and in knowing that you're giving in these particular ways. But I think it is tough at first speaking from my experience, to prioritize that. But I guess once I sat down and actually thought through budgeting and those sorts of things, I decided to try it, and I think it's been a blessing to be able to give to others and have some set aside, able to do that. And do you see people that almost from giving, do you see that as like a benefit to a person, spiritually or personally? Do you see that as something that can definitely benefit the person that's doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think undoubtedly, God says to test me, see if you can outgive me,
Right.
And of course we can't. So I've spoken with many people who, at various times in their life had financial hardship, and have attested to, we continued to tithe and God continued to provide. And it wasn't like he suddenly made us rich. It wasn't like we put in $1 and we got out two. It wasn't like that at all. But it was hard, and it was a struggle, and it was a challenge to tithe. And yet, God met their needs, and they obviously didn't starve, and, didn't completely go without. And, as time went on, they got beyond that financial hardship. So I think we should, tithing is not an investment, in the sense that we should expect some, financial monetary return on investment. It really, God doesn't need our money for anything. It really is more of it's a spiritual investment. It's an investment in our relationship, and it's an investment in our, ability to trust God as our provider. Yet I do think with all that said, there are scriptural examples of when we do practice stewardship. If we're responsible with the little, we'll be entrusted with more. So again, I think we should be careful to have this mindset. If I tithe, I'm going to be blessed financially.
Right.
Maybe not. But that's not why we tithe.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's I don't think there's a black and white. I think we tithe out of obedience and of trust, and then God chooses to. He gives us, according to our abilities, it says in Matthew, and according to what we've been responsible with. So it may be that as we tithe, we become more disciplined, we become more trustworthy with our money. Later on, we are given more, not because we tithe, but because we've proven, that we trust God. We've proven that we can be responsible with what He's entrusted to us, the little that we have to start with. So I think definitely, if you are in the position of having a little, you all the more should tithe.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned about some of the ways that you help people to invest in companies that are having that are involved in good causes, things like that. But in terms of kind of scriptural and biblical and that side of things, what way does the Bible kind of what way has it shaped your company, if you know what I mean? What are some of the core values that you rely on, maybe more so than a non-Christian company, beyond just deciding which companies are involved in things that you want to be investing in?
Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah. I'm not great at scriptural references, so right. I know pretty close.
So I'm the same. I'm the exact same.
Yeah.
There's people that can just rhyme things off, straight off the top of your head. And maybe that's something we should aspire to. But I'm terrible with remembering I've got my things highlighted, but I'll never remember them in mind. Yeah. So I'm in the same place.
Yeah, we have some that we work on memorizing with our children, and like those, I know the references of those well. But other ones that I've just sometimes I know the reference, sometimes I don't. But anyway, on the biblical investing side, one that comes to mind from Proverbs, so it says it's better to have little with righteousness than great gains with injustice. And it's worded differently depending on translations. But that one was one early on that I was like, okay, it doesn't matter if we sacrifice some returns, which really we don't have to. But if we did, if we were in a position where we needed to sacrifice returns in order to be obedient stewards of God's money, then Scripture is clear that we should, that we should not profit from unjust gain or unrighteousness. And then, like I mentioned earlier, when I was figuring out, should Christians pursue wealth, and what does Scripture have to say about that? What is, the most biblical financial goal, which really ended up being stewardship, that I landed on, and that came from two passages. I think they were from Luke chapter 12 and Matthew 25, but it was the parable of, the rich farmer who his barns were full. What should I do? I guess I'll build bigger barns and so I can keep storing. And the key part of it was that he said, so that I can eat, drink, relax, and be merry. And those aren't bad things in moderation, obviously, but he was no longer trying to steward what God had given him. He was no longer wanting to be productive. He was just going to sit back, eat, drink, relax, and be merry. And I don't think we're ever called to that as Christians. Versus, the parable of the talents, we see that they were productive with what God had given them. It doesn't say, we don't know how they made more money of the talents they were given. It says they traded. That's all we know. And so, they did some kind of business, whether they invested it or went out and start their own business, I don't know, but they traded in some way. But we see that we are to be, productive and faithful stewards of God's money. The one who was not productive, he protected it, but he was not productive with it, was the one who was, chastised and it was taken away from him. So,
that's very clear. God said, at least you could have invested it, or you should have done something with it. It's actually
you could have put it in the bank and at least earned interest. Yeah. So that helped inform this idea for me of the importance of stewardship. Even if we are no longer, working, even if we're quote unquote retired, we have talents, and I do believe that the talents in that passage are, were money. They were currency of some sort, but certainly, we see other examples of stewardship. Peter talks about stewarding our gifts, and you really can steward everything, the gospel itself, that God has given us. So thinking through, how do we get there? And then what does that look like from a tangible financial goal, and kind of zeroing in on financial freedom, which of course I didn't get directly from the Bible. It doesn't address that specifically, but that was the best goal that kind of balanced not having enough, which can be burdensome, and Proverbs, kind of chastises with now pursuing more than we're needing, and kind of being like that, that rich farmer. It was the balancing point of, we've prepared for the future. We're being responsible with what we've been given. We're taking care of our family and our grandchildren and so forth. Maybe we're in a position of leaving a legacy, or we're giving generously, but we're not just out pursuing wealth for the sake of wealth. Now we can think about how to use everything God's given us, whether it's money, time, relationships, gifts, for his glory and to be a blessing to others. And that was, there was a lot of study. There was a lot of time and really a lot of struggling, like asking myself difficult questions that, if I come to this answer, then that means that I'm going to have a position where I'm telling clients, no, you don't invest anymore, start giving away. And that affects my income,
right. Yeah.
It does. And so, but having to say, but this is what the Bible says, this is what I should be teaching. And again, I should be relying and trusting on God to provide for me, not getting every dollar I can out of my clients. It's how do I minimize what they're having to spend, and how do I, get them in the position where they can give the most that they can, even if it's affecting my, my bottom line, so to speak. I have no idea if that's what you were looking for, but that is how, Scripture has informed a lot of the, the business that I've built today.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. And I think it's really interesting what you said about, the financial struggling being a burden in some ways, because I think there's sometimes an attitude that if you're well off and you're not struggling, that in some way that you're less pious, or that you're doing something wrong, you should be struggling, or you should be feeling that burden. And it's interesting to hear you say that, in a lot of cases that is a negative, and some people I think definitely are called to be, even like you were interested in being a missionary and those sorts of things. There are people that are called to be, in positions where they're, relying in faith for people to give, and they're in those kind of more tricky situations. But I think that's a great point that you made, that in a lot of cases, there's people that are, I think, definitely called to be, as much as there's missionaries, there's people that are called to fund the missionaries, if you know what I mean. And in a lot of cases, being in that position of financial struggle can actually be impeding what God's will is, for giving and enabling others to go and do those things. I don't feel like I'm called to be a missionary, but at the same time, I think if I'm not necessarily being called to do that, then I should be enabling those who are in a certain way. That's the way I would maybe see it. But I don't know if that's a popular opinion in a lot of church groups. And some people think, if you're if you're well off, then there's something wrong. There's something, fishy about that. But I don't know if you have any opinions on that side of things, but I thought it was really cool for you to bring that up, because I think sometimes it's something that's not maybe highlighted often enough.
Yeah, Josh, I do have opinions on that.
Great. That's what I want. That's what I like to hear.
Yeah, and informed by Scripture. So again, we see people like we saw prophets like Elijah, who God sent away, and like literally God fed him from ravens, and from a brook, and I mean extreme poverty. And we see modern day examples of that, of people who are called to go and to rely on others, and they oftentimes have very, very little. So there are people who God calls to poverty, in a sense, to go and serve regardless, to not make money, but to go and serve and totally trust him. And of course, he uses the church to make that happen most of the time. Sometimes he uses the birds, but typically, it's the church who's providing. And then we see people like Solomon and David and Abraham, were extremely wealthy people. Even in the New Testament, we saw Paul being, he was a tent maker, so he was able to support himself to a degree. But there were times when he was, being supported by other believers in the church. And we see many examples of Christians in this place, blessing Christians in this place.
Yeah.
And so money trading hands. And if there weren't if there weren't haves, so to speak, if there weren't haves versus have-nots in the church, there wouldn't be anywhere for that to come from. Right. And so God, uses all of it. I know someone. I know a financial planner. He's a Christian financial advisor, and he does the biblically responsible investing as well. He works in Louisiana, and he is really niche too. Like his clients are, they have to have at least $10 million to work with him, and most of them have way more than that. So it's these ultra wealthy that he's working with. And he had one time, who was kind of lamenting his wealth, like, I have so much. Should I sell this multi-million-dollar house that I live in and my helicopter,
right?
and be giving it away? And as they continue talking, he was making the point that he lives in a neighborhood with other, multi-million-dollar houses, and they're all business owners, and business owners like that, they're difficult to have conversations with. They're busy and they're private. And the planner was asking him, like, tell me about your relationships with your neighbors. And he was like, oh, I have, I'm friends with this guy and this guy. They're both atheists. But because, they're both business owners, because they live in the same neighborhood, like they spend time with one another. They go to each other's houses. And he was one of few people who had a close relationship with these people. And he was like, if I sold my house, and weren't here and gave away all my money, there's no way I could, have the relationship that I have with these men. And so I don't think that there's right or wrong in terms of how much we have. It's definitely more of a heart issue. So I think there are some that God calls to poverty. And I think there are some that God calls to wealth and equips them to be able to make enormous amounts of money. And many of them support great organizations and ministries. And there's a lot of ministries out there that we know of who, they get donations from masses, but a lot of times they rely on 2 or 3 huge donors who are wealthy individuals. And then most of us are neither. Most of us are in that in between. Yeah. And that's the people that I think, financial freedom is the goal. So it certainly isn't for everyone. But yeah, I don't think it's, if you've been called to poverty, then do it. But otherwise, it's not a pious goal. Honestly, it's typically an excuse for something or fear of something.
Right.
But money is just something that God made. It's amoral. We are to steward it well, and it can certainly be used as a blessing. If you're getting more money than you want, give it away.
Yeah. And this reminds me of for one summer, my brother also volunteered, but I worked at this summer camp, which was really, I guess it was for the wealthy kids, and it was marketed almost at that because it cost quite a lot to go there, and they had their helipads for people dropping off their kids. Some people arriving in their boats and those kind of things. And they're the sort of people that you see arriving there. And, they've got the best speedboats, the best everything. But their goal was, it's not necessarily about, that it's a negative that we're reaching out to people that are super wealthy. And it's not a negative that we have great facilities. That's not a bad thing. The point is, if we're not reaching that part of society, then who is? What there's a lot of Christian camps out there for people that are, maybe can't afford to go to somewhere super blingy, and it's if you want to reach those people, then that's also an amazing goal. But at the same time, who's going to reach out to the kids whose parents are always off on business trips and they're just dropping their kids off maybe for 8 straight weeks in the summer to to give them something to do? Those are the kids that in some ways they're not being reached by the traditional methods. And if you start to then have a negative view of wealth and of using, you know, wealth to reach out to people in those ways, then, you know, they're saying that you're basically just leaving those people stranded, you know, with no one to reach out to them. So that's when I think gears started turning in that regard, because I'd never heard people talk about it that way. I think some people think that it's overly extravagant that a camp for kids could have amazing facilities and the best of the best, but at the same time, then you start to realize that's a very specific ministry target in some ways, and that's using wealth in a really positive way, you know. And it was great to hear your views on that, because like I said, I think sometimes it can be, you know, it can be a goal to be on the breadline and not, you know, having any excess or any leftover. But yeah, thanks so much for joining me, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but it was really great to talk to you about some of this stuff, and I really appreciate you joining me today. So for anyone that's interested in what you're doing, and maybe it's from the area, you know, where can people find you and find out more about your company?
Yeah, Josh, thanks so much for having me on. This was a really fun conversation. I'm glad that there was no preparation to it, really. Like, we just got to talk through all this, and
exactly.
it was fun to do it that way. The main website is biblicalwealthsolutions.com. And I also have a podcast called the Biblical Wealth Podcast, where you can listen to anywhere that you listen to podcasts. And so the podcast is a great way to learn more about what I do, to really get a good understanding, dive deeper into biblical investing and non-Wall Street investments and things like that. Some of the insurance and stuff we talked about. I also put together, it's a short ebook, you know, so I'm not marketing like I wrote a book. Right. It's 17 pages. It's short, but I wanted it to be, and it's really an overview of some of what we talked about today, and just kind of the process that I take people through on a very high level, and then links to specific podcast episodes or other resources or videos that I've put out, or whatever is relevant. And Josh, I sent you a link that you can put in the show notes, where people can click to and download that ebook there. So if you want to, listen to me, the podcast is great. If you're more of a reader, the ebook is great. Of course, things are on the website, and I'm always available by email. My email is hello@biblicalwealthsolutions.com.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much again, and I'll drop all those links down below in the description on YouTube, and I'll put it on our Instagram, stuff like that. But yeah, thanks again, and it was just great talking to you, and hopefully our listeners were blessed by hearing your perspective. But that's all for this week's episode of The Two Things You Shouldn't Talk About. Join us next time for more interesting conversation about these sometimes difficult topics. But it's great to dive in, I think, in conversation and talk about stuff that isn't normally brought up, including wealth. That does come under that, in my opinion. So thanks for listening, and hope to see you next time on the show. Thanks so much for watching.